It's a feature of every new football season and each new competition. Before the action starts, the new ball is unveiled, and generally without too much fuss. Supporters will either love or hate the design, and each new release is accompanied by technological jargon. But rarely does the change of ball provoke a change in the sport. That wasn't the case though in 2010, when Adidas released a football that incited widespread outcry, accusations of unfair advantages, and a melodrama that threatened to overshadow a World Cup. We're talking about the Jabulani, the official ball of South Africa, 2010, that swerved, dipped, and at times appeared to have a mind of its own. It was also materially different to many of its predecessors. Most footballs used prior had consisted of a 32-panel blend of hexagons and pentagons. At the 2006 World Cup, Adidas launched their Teamgeist ball, built from 14 panels. The Jabulani evolved a step further and used just 8. In addition to which, in a change from the Teamgeist's perfectly smooth design, the ball for the 2010 World Cup also incorporated what Adidas called grip and groove ridges on its panels, which it promised would provide not just more friction between boot and ball, meaning more control, but also consistency in the ball's behaviour in different weather conditions. The Jabulani was a perfect sphere. It truly was, as Adidas claimed, the roundest ball ever made. But its characteristics created tremendous difficulty. You see, when a football moves through the air, it encounters resistance, known as aerodynamic drag, which reduces the ball's speed. Think of it like an air brake. Now, importantly, the amount of drag is also determined by the properties of the object the airflow is acting upon, and the property of the air that the object is moving through. Speed is also important, and this was one of the issues with the Jabulani. Objects moving through the air have a critical transition speed, below which the flow of air around them is smooth, or laminar, and above which the flow is more chaotic. For a traditional 32-panelled football, that speed was relatively low, around 35 miles per hour. Unfortunately, for the Jabulani, that point was much higher, and according to studies by NASA back in 2010, closer to 55 miles per hour. And this was highly inconvenient because 55 miles an hour is a speed more commensurate with the average shot or cross in professional football. Of course, the physics are more complicated than we've described, but the issue, in plain terms, was that the Jabulani was a very aerodynamic and fast-moving football which changed its behaviours in the air at precisely the wrong moment. Rabi Mehta, a NASA aerospace engineer, explained the problem to The Independent's Callum Rice-Coates in 2020. When one measures the drag force on a ball, the force is relatively high at the lowest speeds, but at some critical speed, the drag drops suddenly. This critical speed is determined by the roughness on the ball. So one of the reasons why golf balls have dimples is because of their effect in reducing drag. Similarly, traditional footballs achieve the same with their stitching and rough textures, which also influence the flow of air across them in flight. The Jabulani then, a perfect sphere, but with its grip and groove textures, was really a thing of goalkeeping nightmares. An aerodynamic football, but one which experienced sudden drops in drag at very high speeds. And the goalkeepers led the backlash against it. Spain's Iker Casillas described it as rotten and as having terrible characteristics. Gianluigi Buffon determined it to be unpredictable. And Brazil's Julio Cesar damningly claimed that he could find a better ball in a supermarket. It was hard to judge how impactful the Jabulani was at the World Cup. There were other aggravating factors, including some of the games at the World Cup being played in the low-density air of altitude. And Adidas and FIFA were both defiant at the time, attributing the difficulties to the typical early tournament adjustment process. Most notably, following Robert Green's famous mistake against the United States, there was a determination that the ball shouldn't be blamed. "We believe it was down to a massive goalkeeping mistake," said an Adidas spokesman of Green's era. So there were plenty of mistakes. There were missed touches, overhit long passes, and further accusation that the ball was too bouncy. But some of the highlights at that World Cup were extraordinary. Diego Forlan, Kazuki Honda, and Suleiman Tari all scored goals notable for unusual ball movement. And as the conversation around the ball intensified, it became a scapegoat for any and all mistakes. Nevertheless, it was hard to ignore complaints of players who claimed that the design of the Jabulani made it harder to anticipate whatever spin was applied to it, or even how it was rolling. Opta calculated that between the group stages and the quarterfinals, there were more misplaced passes in South Africa 2010 than in any of the 4 previous tournaments. Italy forward Gianpaolo Pazzini revealed the difficulty in crossing the ball with accuracy, and Javi Hernandez, arguably the finest number 6 of his era, would describe the Jabulani as difficult to control. So, the ball's place in history is interesting. It's notorious, and yet, because of football's nature and the obfuscating effect of the junk science that surrounded the 2010 World Cup, it's impossible to determine which of that tournament's strange moments were down to the ball and which were down to the players. Whatever the case, the Jabulani remains notorious, and the controversy it created has never been repeated. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic brings you the best sports journalism in the world in a personalised experience, connecting you with the stories and teams that you care about the most. There's coverage of 13 sports, plus direct access to world-class journalists through live Q&As, discussions and podcasts. And you can try it now for free for 30 days by clicking the link in the description.